Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Brainwaves webinar on unlocking well-being, the power of creativity on young people's mental health and well-being. Thank you very much for joining us today and being part of this discussion. So my name is Tracy, I'm from Brainwaves, and I'm your host this afternoon. Today, what we are talking about is the important role that nurturing creativity in schools can play in fostering better well-being in young people. And to help with that, I'm delighted to welcome our panel of speakers. Firstly, we have Neil Humphrey, who is Professor of Psychology of Education at the University of Manchester. Neil is also the academic lead for the Be Well research programme into young people's well-being. Neil has over £10 million secured in external research grants. So his research interests varied, but they include the concept of creative health in schools, which looks at how participation in arts, culture, sport, and entertainment are linked to improved well-being over time among young people. Thanks so much for joining us today, Neil.
Thanks, Tracy. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
From a school's perspective, I need to put my teeth in today. We are delighted to be joined by Gareth Gay, who is Head of Music Service at Camden Learning. Gareth leads the strategic development and delivery of music education across the borough in Camden. He's also the Chair of Governors and a Safeguarding Governor at a primary school in Surrey. So great to have you with us today, Gareth.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here.
And we're also pleased to welcome Katrina Harris to our panel. Katrina is a HCPC registered art psychotherapist and clinical lead with over a decade of experience delivering art therapy to both groups and individuals affected by trauma, social and emotional, and mental health needs across schools, trusts, and clinical settings. Thank you for being here today, Katrina.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
And finally, joining us on the panel as usual is Julian Turner, who is Director of Education here at Brainwaves. Hi, Julian. On that note, let's get started. Let's diving into some of the research behind all this idea then. Neil, I'm going to come to you first. Just so we're all completely clear, can you maybe clarify what we mean by the term creative health and what this looks like with young people?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. So creative health is a really simple idea. It's about the notion that we can improve people's health and well-being by supporting their participation in creative activities, but also beyond that, just engagement in kind of culture and heritage as well. So there's not one kind of one size fits all recipe. It's a whole range of things. It could be supporting people to participate in visual and performing arts. It could be dance, film, literature, music, singing, even like crafts and gardening and engaging with nature. It's not a million miles away from if people have heard of social prescribing. There's a kind of a high degree of overlap between creative health and social prescribing. And it's just taking that idea that there are ways beyond the kind of traditional ways in which we think about improving well-being, which might typically have been historically, kind of talking therapies and things like that. It's the idea that actually there's a lot more that we can do that will improve people's health and well-being, and that this is really quite an untapped resource, particularly in relation to young people.
Amazing. Now, I know that you've obviously done a lot of research in this area. Can you tell us about some of the work you have done to explore the impact of creative health on young people in schools?
Yeah, thanks. So we've done a fair bit very recently, and I'll start with we've just published a systematic literature review, which was looking at what the evidence out there that other people have produced tells us about whether young people's everyday engagement in these kinds of activities. So, as I said, things like music, performing arts, drawing, painting, all those kinds of different things, the extent to which their everyday engagement in those kinds of activities, was there a kind of a causal relationship with improved well-being? And what we found was really promising. So there's quite a lot of research been done already. And within that, as you would expect with any research area, some of the research is really good and some of it's not great. But with the research that is good and that's robust enough for us to kind of make a causal inference, if you like, that we can say that these kinds of activities are actually leading to improvements in young people's mental health. There was promising evidence in that regard. So the kind of foundational literature that's out there tells us that there's likely a causal kind of relationship here. We've then done a piece of work using our Be Well data set, So in Be Well, one of the things that we survey young people about is the kinds of things that we've been talking about here. And we did a really nice piece of work looking at the whole range of different things that young people told us they did in this kind of space. And then we created profiles. So we looked at, profiles of young people that didn't really have much engagement at all, profiles of young people that had kind of mixed engagement. They participated in some activities and not others, and then profiles of young people that had kind of really wide-ranging engagement. And then we were able to use that to look at whether those different patterns of engagement in arts, culture, entertainment, and sport, whether they then predict improvements in young people's well-being going into the future. So, when young people were in year 8, did their participation in these kinds of activities predict their well-being in year 9 after controlling for prior levels of well-being and different background variables and things like that? And we found actually some really promising evidence there that those kinds of activities do indeed kind of predict later well-being. So we could see better well-being among young people with wide-ranging engagement than among those young people who had very limited engagement. So again, really promising evidence there.
Mm. What were some of the types of creative health activities that you were introducing?
So we're asking young people about a whole range of things. So it could be things like whether they're playing in a band or an orchestra. It could be, are they drawing, painting, making things? Are they, doing things like zine making? It could be other creative activities, things that are like things like performing arts. It could be going to the theatre. It could be, basically, there's no real kind of limit on the scope of what's included here, other than
Mm.
that it kind of fits under that general kind of definition of kind of arts and creativity and culture and heritage. So all those different things that we typically associate with those words, we ask young people about those, and then we can look,
Yeah.
to what extent each young person does these different activities more or less frequently, and then, like I said, use that to understand whether it predicts their future well-being.
Amazing. So we are going to explore the impact of that work a little later on, but I'm just going to bring Katrina and Gareth into the conversation now to find out more about how they're using creativity in schools. So Gareth, let's start with you. Yes, you're head of music at a service at Camden Learning. How are you using music to support student well-being in schools across Camden?
I think I should also say as well that before I became head of music service, I had a long time career as a classroom music teacher in a secondary school as well. So I do kind of understand the school background. I understand it from both sides. I think just kind of building on what's just been said. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is what young people tell me, because in my service literally doesn't need to exist if young people don't want to access it. So I try to embed a culture of trying to make sure that their voice is heard in everything that we're doing. And one of the things that I've done in the past is I've taken quite a bit of time to survey young people in schools and actually ask them how important is music to them, in their lives on a scale of 1 to 10. And actually, in my last job, I did this across the whole of Southwest London and got nearly 4,000 responses. And over 50% of people, of young people, gave 8, 9, 10 out of 10, saying that music is really, really important to their lives. So that for me is maybe not a massive surprise. I mean, I think it's nice to have that data, but young people do think music is really important to them. And I think maybe a strategy is in your own schools, ask young people how they feel about music. And we know all about the general things that everyone talks about. I mean, lots of people will say that music is good for building confidence and building community and building self-esteem. But we are really interested in trying to reach our non-traditional music service groups. So we're trying to look at how we can work with other services to capture kids that would not normally come and work with us. So one example of that is recently we've started to develop something called a nurture group, which is about using music as a tool to improve things like attendance, overcome emotional issues that the pupils might be facing in school, and using music in a small group scenario to try and overcome some of those issues. And doing it in a very kind of low stakes way where they're not going to feel any pressure. And for some kids, we're starting to see that's really starting to make a difference. So that would be one example.
Interesting. In your survey, when they were saying how important music was to them, do you think that was sort of organized music or music that they listened to on a personal level?
Well, what was really interesting, I think it's just they love music. I mean, when he comes home from school, he's, if he's upset, he'll go upstairs and ask Alexa to play his playlist. Kids do love to do that. But it is, I think young people love music, whether it's listening to music or playing music. I mean, some people absolutely love it but have no desire to play it, and that's fine, but they have a strong relationship with music. But what was really interesting from my survey as a follow-on question was, how often do you get to listen to and explore the music that you love in your school curriculum? And the result was much, much lower. So one of the things that I need to think about as a strategic leader for music is, how can we bridge that gap between the academic needs for studying music, but also capitalizing on that, raw passion that young people have for music? There's a disconnect there, I think.
It might be worth mentioning that one of the brainwaves lessons that we have, I'm sure many of you will be aware that we have a curriculum of wellbeing lessons freely available to schools. But one of them is about managing your mood, and one of the recommended strategies there is to do with scheduling an activity that that you enjoy. So I know that I have one person very close to me who was struggling a little bit with their mental health, who used to through their GCSEs would schedule in a period of listening to music, because that was the number one thing, the most important thing to her in her life, and that was a sort of gave her a sense of control over her mood through the day. And I think that's quite a useful strategy to recommend to people. There was good evidence for that.
So sadly, as a music service, we find we obviously run lots of out of school activities, orchestras and choirs and so on. And unfortunately, that summer term, we do find lots of children saying, I'm in year 11 now, I need to not come to my rehearsals on a Saturday morning because I need to revise, and really, I genuinely, they probably do genuinely believe it, but I don't believe that's going to make any difference. I think they're probably better off coming to the rehearsal and seeing their friends. But I mean, that's an issue.
I agree with you about the gigs, Neil, absolutely. Katrina, so just so we're clear, can you maybe give us an outline about what art therapy is and what your work involves and how you use it as a therapeutic approach in schools?
Of course. So I think it's firstly important to make the distinction that it's not art classes. All art therapists are with the HCPC, so it is a protected title. You get many people that come, that children are referred, and some staff in schools that I've worked in before that think they need to be good at art. You don't need to be Picasso. It's not an art class. It's usually non-directive, although your art therapist will have different ways of working with what the points of referral were. So it's usually referral based. You're working as a psychotherapist, but with the use of art materials, which can be very useful for children and adolescents that are not yet able to verbalize traumas that they've been through, or things that are going on at home, or issues that they're having with schoolwork, or with peers, or anxiety. So you can really adapt it with many different approaches, whether that's one-to-one or in groups, to help them manage their lives at school and home better, as a brief overview.
Yeah, and it's something that you do in both groups and one-on-one approach as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So I've done a group recently, for example. I was thinking this might be a nice strategy, if I'm not jumping the gun, for people that are on the webinar, which is it was originally devised in Africa, I believe, but it's a tree of life group. So this could be carried out by anybody. So it's using the basis of So you'll start with kind of ground, and that you might look at like where you've come from. The trunk is kind of strengths, and so on. So fruits are things that you hope for the future, gifts you've been given in terms of whether it's things like strengths, compliments. So it's very skills and strengths based, without going too much into what potentially might be more difficult for somebody if you're not trained in art psychotherapy. But yes, I think depending on the child, and the reason for referral, one-to-one or group can both be really effective. I think sometimes if it's more of a shared experience, for example, say if it's a GCSE anxiety group, which we ran in the last school in which I worked, that was really effective as a group for people to actually share their concerns around, you know, attainment, feeling good enough, general anxiety around it. So there's ways that you can implement it as well, that more shared experience within secondary schools.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay. Well, great. Well, we're going to think now about some of the impact that this work that you're all doing has had. So, Neil, do you want to talk a little bit more about the impact that your research has had on young people's mental health and well-being?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tracy. So I'll give the colleagues in the audience a bit of a case study and evaluation that we've just done, which I will paste into the chat just before I forget. So this is an evaluation of, so this is a school-based program. So colleagues may have heard of an organization called Factory International, who are based in Manchester at Aviva Studios. They do a whole, they're kind of, you know, at the heart of the kind of creative sector in Greater Manchester. One of the things that they do is a program for young people in schools. In a nutshell, it involves, they have a network of kind of local artists, who go into schools and they work. So it's a sort of small groups of young people, and they work with them on a weekly basis. And each half term there is a different art or creative medium that they build a project around. So just to give a flavour of that, in the evaluation that we did the year that we looked at, they had a digital project using GarageBand and iMovie and Sketches School to build a creative project through digital means. That was one half term. Another half term, they focused on poetry. Another half term focused on collage. One focused on photography. Another one focused on movement, poetry, and rap. And it all culminates in an end of year kind of celebration event at Aviva Studios in Manchester. So it's bringing in these artists who quite often are kind of from the communities that the young people themselves are from, to immerse them in these different kind of art forms and kind of media, as a way to kind of try and enhance their well-being and re-engage. They quite often will work with young people who are perhaps kind of disengaging from school for different reasons. So they're quite often working with young people who aren't necessarily experiencing success elsewhere in their school lives. They also, though, do work with young people who are kind of potentially like not so much disengaged, but maybe kind of not fulfilling their full potential. But basically, it's about using those different art forms as a medium to build relationships with young people, let them experience success, and kind of unlock their creativity. And what we did was, we're already collecting data on an annual basis in the Be Well project. So we've got data on tens of thousands of young people's well-being. So we gathered data on about 100 and something kids who were part of the Factory Schools pilot. And then we were able to use a technique that basically matches the kids up in the data set. So it's something called propensity score matching. It basically gives us a really, from our tens of thousands of kids in Be Well's data, we're able to pull out a sample that look very much like the sample of kids who took part in Factory Schools. So they become like a kind of synthetic control group. And then we can analyze the data and we can kind of say, well, if you've participated in Factory Schools, is your well-being better compared to very, very similar kids who didn't participate? And what we found in terms of impact was two really exciting things, really. One was that participation in the Factory Schools program significantly enhanced young people's ability to cope with stress in their lives. So one of the measures was that we looked at was how well young people felt they were able to cope with stress. We saw significant improvements in the Factory Schools group relative to our control group, but we also saw really promisingly improvements in young people's life satisfaction. So we use an item that the Office for National Statistics use, And the factory schools group, there was an improvement in their life satisfaction relative to the control group. In terms of the kind of magnitude of these changes, the change we saw in life satisfaction, in terms of kind of anchoring it in something else, the change that we saw was equivalent to the change that you see in adults when they go from being unemployed to being employed. So it's really quite a significant kind of shift. And our colleagues at Pro Bono Economics, who they do all the kind of cost effectiveness kind of side of things. They look at not just does it work, but does it provide value for money? And we're going to be publishing at some point before Christmas a report that we've done the analysis, or they've done the analysis rather, social return on investment, and what they've been able to do is look at how much does it cost to deliver a program like this relative to the kind of well-being gains. And because we've got improvements in life satisfaction, those can be monetized. They can be transferred into something called wellbeing years, and the Treasury places a monetary value on those. Long story short, for every £1 that you invest, you get about £7 back in monetized wellbeing benefits. So our research shows that it has an impact on young people's life satisfaction, ability to cope with stress, and then the economic analysis shows it really does provide excellent value for money as well in terms of what it would cost schools to deliver a program like that versus the benefits that they'll see from young people's participation. So really, really promising stuff.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah. How important is it, the activity, to have an activity that resonates with the culture of young people? You mentioned like garage music. Is that more effective than poetry, or are there certain activities that are more effective?
No, what I think the factory school study and our broader study that I mentioned earlier shows is there isn't one single thing that it's actually probably the key is having a range of activities available to young people. There are going to
Interesting.
be some young people where, the half term that they spent doing the rap project, where that really resonates with them, and that's their and for those young people, it's like, wow, we're able to do this in school. Yeah, it kind of feels
Yeah.
almost like, that it changes the way that they think about what school is for and things like that. But for other young people, it might be the collage, or it might be the kind of photography, the kind of the whole design of the factory schools program and our other study that I mentioned earlier. Kind of both show that actually having a range for young people is really important, because then you're kind of covering all your bases. There'll be something for everybody at some point in that kind of journey, and it's exposing young people to experiences where it might be the first time that they feel like they've genuinely experienced success in school, and what that can do for a young person's self-esteem and their sense of connection to school can be transformative. So having that range of activities for young people, I think, is really crucial.
Yeah. Julian, do you think that it relates to the concept of flow, which we've discussed in our in our webinars previously, which is something we model our lessons on?
Yeah, I think that any of these creative activities, and actually, it's a good that you've raised that. So I was also going to say, I think it's not just to do with what you're doing, that we can put some things into a creative bucket, but it's also to do with how you do it. I mean, I enjoy baking. I would not say I'm a very creative baker, but some people are. Some people are really get into so I think if you it's also to do with your approach, how you're approaching what your mindset is. So but all of these activities, any sort of sustained activity, get to a point where you're balancing your ability to do it with a sense of stretch, a sense of you're just trying to expand yourself. That is very positive for your well-being. We know that, from the great Mihali's work on flow, is sort of very positive around that.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. And Gareth, if we bring music into the mix, then what sort of particular sort of approaches have you found to be most beneficial in terms of community approaches or orchestras or anything like that? What do you find works well in terms of well-being?
Yeah, so I think what we do as a music service is we try to form really high quality partnerships so that we can bring different organizations in to come and do projects in school or set programs up in schools. And in Camden, we have a fairly unique situation where over many years of working with the Orchestra for the Age of Enlightenment, about 5 years ago, they decided to base themselves in one of our major secondary schools in the borough. And I was talking to them yesterday about the impact that it has on young people's health. And it very much is a really positive thing to have more people around the school, that they've got professional musicians mentoring young people, working with them. They have a range of different programs that they run in the school, but then they can also signpost young people to other opportunities. So the OAE is a professional orchestra, and they've now got to the point where young people from that school are going to do sound and lighting for those events. So it's a really kind of interesting way of how can you work alongside the professional arts industry to create opportunities and expand horizons. One of the things that I find, I'm still relatively new to Camden, but if a young person wants to work in the performing arts industry or the music industry, and they're growing up in Camden, it's literally right on their doorstep. So working with professional organizations and showing them that this could be a pathway for you because there's people around you doing these jobs is really, really interesting. And again, it's about building that community. Other partnerships that we've looked to kind of create is in Camden, we have the English Folk Dance and Song Society, and we're doing Key Stage 3 curriculum project at the moment where we are developing a mentorship program. So children that play instruments, who are learning them and having lessons, are actually going to be mentoring those that don't have lessons, and using classroom time to develop the kind of classroom pedagogy as a way of moving things forward. So there's just an example of what partnerships are around. I would I'd encourage anybody that's interested in music on this call. I know you're not all music teachers, but do contact your local music service, because they'll almost certainly be doing things that you could tap into. There will be projects that you can get involved with that maybe would help with some of the things that you're talking about here.
Yeah, it's going to be different opportunities in different places, aren't there? I was going to give a shout out to Amanda in the chat earlier, who was talking about she ran a science lesson to discuss the benefit of singing from a science point of view. But singing is just incredible thing to get involved with, even for the talentless, among which I would count myself. But it's just a wonderful thing from a well-being point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think the the benefits of music are widely known and reported, but also for other creative outlets as well. But we do have a lot of young people that want to make music, and it's about we spend a lot of time trying to remove the barriers that are preventing them, whether they be financial or other. And also just looking at new ways in which we can engage young people as well. We're very interested at the moment in trying to get young people to compose their own music, and find ways in which we can celebrate that. We're very lucky in Camden that every 2 years we do a massive performance at the Royal Albert Hall, and we have 1,800 children singing and performing as part of that concert, which is great for one type of musician, but we also then want to find those musicians who are composers. And a simple idea, Neil was talking about GarageBand, for example, just creating some space for them to use that software, either to kind of do some very simple composition work, lots of resources on YouTube that you could tap into, or even just getting them to make podcasts using that kind of technology as well. It's a creative outlet that they would be very interested in doing.
That's a really good suggestion. I haven't considered podcasts, absolutely. But any kind of social media content is essentially creative these days, isn't it? So I'm just a bit conscious on we're coming up to about 5 o'clock. So I'm just going to turn our attention now to how we can maybe use some of the information that we've discussed today to introduce more creativity in schools. Neil, do you have any particular recommendations from your research that could help inform schools in terms of curriculum design or enrichment activities, etc.?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I mean, I think so. I think the role that the research that we, the team that I lead and others can play is about creating the case, if you like, for doing this. That this isn't just something to do just because we think we need a broad and balanced curriculum, which of course we do, right? But that in the midst of a demonstrable kind of public health crisis in relation to young people's well-being, that there's clear evidence from this research that these sorts of activities can make a genuine difference in young people's lives. And I think so the role that the research can play is in helping to if there are within the kind of school leadership team, for example, if there is some skepticism as to, well, why should we devote valuable resource and curriculum time and finances to this kind of activity? What I hope the research that I've been talking about, that my colleagues Stephanie and Sam and other members of the team have been leading on, is to kind of show, well, here's the evidence. Here's the evidence that it makes a difference, and that in terms of that economic piece, that it also is cost effective. So the investment that's being made from the school is going to pay dividends later down the line. And then it's kind of over to the staff in the school, right? So that there will be staff in the school who are the real experts when it comes to, well, here's how I would build my curriculum around whether it's collage or kind of music, as Gareth's been talking about. But it's kind of the research giving schools the kind of confidence that actually this is an aspect of young people's lives that's well worth investing in.
Mm, absolutely. Okay. If schools are going to be introducing things like this, how important is measuring those interventions, or and what can they possibly do to measure the impact? Because I'm sure that is a very important part of knowing how much effect you're having. Any thoughts on that, Neil?
Yeah, I think measurement really important, because you'll always want to be able to, as in other areas of school activity, right? You want to be able to show that these things that you've been doing are making a difference. But it's also important because you might need to adapt and tweak as you go along. So it's gathering the outcomes data is important, because it's then a case of being able to say, well, let's if we change this bit, do we see a kind of a difference in young people's well-being? But I think the really good news for schools is there are projects that you can get involved with where that kind of measurement is happening anyway, and then you can use it. So if you're in Greater Manchester on the south coast, Be Well is brainwaves, Oxwell. There are all, depending on where you are in the country, there are these kinds of measurement programs up and running already that then schools can kind of become part of. And then you're getting annual data on the kinds of things we've been talking about: self-esteem, mental health, life satisfaction, well-being.
Yeah.
These are being measured anyway. And then, you can get the data, the feedback to look at, whether what you've done is actually making a notable improvement. But yeah, absolutely, well-being measurement is vital to all of this, so that you can kind of clearly demonstrate the benefits at a local level.
Okay, amazing. Gareth, Katrina, before we go, do you have any sort of recommendations or top tips or advice for schools in terms of how they might, inject more creativity into a curriculum or school life?
I think from a music point of view, I think it's a really great idea to find out what your students are doing outside of school. You may well find, I used to refer to them when I was in the classroom, finding secret musicians, people that are doing creative activities, but not making that connection between what they do out of school and what the classroom is about, or quite frankly, just don't want to tell you. But if you can find out, then you've got a way to start that conversation. I think the other thing is just to start small and let things grow. It doesn't have to be a huge project. Just finding a group of kids that you could get something happening with can build, and it can build quite quickly. But don't be too ambitious and just kind of like that. And I think the third thing is, is reach out to your local music service and music hubs to find out what programs you can piggyback off or get involved with, or even what support they might be able to offer you. They may well have funding streams that they can tap into, that they can help run music projects in your school. So definitely worth asking and having the conversation.
Great, thank you. Katrina, we spoke about not being, obviously art therapy needs to be delivered by a qualified psychotherapist.
Yes. Yeah.
But therapeutic art might be a possibility.
Yes, therapeutic art, absolutely. I think it can, and the importance is just to have it where it's available. If it's kids, if there's areas that kids can make the classroom their own by having creative projects, if it's getting them working creatively on check-ins the minute they come in the door, whatever that looks like, through assemblies, yeah, just get it going. But it's the important distinction is to make, if it's not art psychotherapy or therapy, and you're not trained, it's important to have a different title. So call it something like creative expressions, something that doesn't have therapy in the title, just because that might leave you liable if something does go wrong. Yeah.
Amazing.
Can I quickly mention, Tracy,
sorry.
can I quickly mention one thing, which is just the point that Gareth made earlier about young people particularly in exam years, thinking that they need to sacrifice some of these other activities in favor of doing, revision. I actually think that's a very powerful message that schools can get across, that can say, balance, and creating a balance in your life and having a healthy approach between, sleep and leisure activities and work is actually the most effective way to be successful in those times. So I think that is a message that schools need to get out to the young people as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect place to end, Julian, on a very positive and uplifting note. So thank you very much again, everybody, for taking the time to join today. We look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.